We're going to hear from two people who, I think basically want to shape your discussions a bit, thinking about the key takeaway points that have already emerged from this morning's keynotes. And first up, we have David Francis, who is director of the West London Alliance, just with a few thoughts from David. So over to you, David.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mark. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the West London economy and how it's been impacted by COVID-19. As Mark says, picking up on some of the points that have been presented by Councillor Cowan in his first talk. I'll then hand over to Paul Nazarak, who will run through our response to what's happened from an economic point of view in terms of COVID-19, talking about the Build and Recover plans. Before COVID-19, as Councillor Cowan said, the West London economy at 74 million was bigger than Glasgow, Leeds and Birmingham combined. And we make that point really, not just to sort of brag about the size of the economy, but to actually kind of drive home the point that the West London economy is really vital for London and the wider UK economy. So there's a real interdependency there. And we actually signed off an economic vision for West London in February. So timing wise, that was just before the kind of severity of COVID-19 that became clear. It wasn't evident then. But I think it's just worth saying what we had in mind when we signed off that economic vision, when our leaders signed off that economic vision for West London, because it was based on the strengths of West London. And Councillor Cowan's kind of talked through some of those, but the key strengths that we identified in that vision still remain the strengths of West London. So it was being located between Heathrow and the city, world-leading companies across a range of growth sectors, leading education and research institutions, major regeneration areas such as Brent Cross, Golden Mile and Wembley, and then the excellent connectivity to the rest of London and the UK, and with major new infrastructure on the way, so including Crossrail, HS2 and the West London Orbital, which is a scheme which the West London boroughs have been promoting with Transport for London. So I wondered whether I would be the first speaker to mention Brexit, and I wasn't. Councillor Cowan did mention it. So Brexit was obviously on our minds when we produced the vision back in February. But in the short term, at least, the assumption was that West London had the economic assets and its geographical location to continue growing into the future. And the kind of main challenges that we saw at that time were around inclusion, so making sure that sections of the community who had consistently been left out of the economic growth could actually take part in the economic growth. Linked to that was bridging the skills gap, because we knew or we know that actually although there was a shortage in many sectors, there were people who could actually move into those jobs with the right support. And the other challenge, which the Deputy Mayor has outlined in detail, was around the sort of climate change challenge and zero carbon. So those sort of challenges are still there with us, and I guess the other thing that we pulled out in our economic vision, and we actually called it winning in the new economy, was the fact that the world was changing fast. And I think as a result of COVID-19, there's a lot of debate about the extent to which it's changed our lives, our economy and society, how we function within it. And there's a well-worn phase now, which is about acceleration of existing trends. There are changes such as more people working from home, and people are asking the question, is that the demise of the large corporate head office? And what are the implications for how land is going to be used across London, which is very relevant to the conversations we're going to be having today. And there are also changes to the West London labour market, which are already evident. So in June, we had 270,000 people who had been furloughed, which was well over a quarter of the total number of people furloughed in London. And we in June, we also had 127,000 new universal credit claimants in the second quarter of 2020. compared to the first quarter where we had 18,000. So there's been a real spike in the people claiming universal credit and out of work benefits. And a lot of that is linked to the job losses at Heathrow and the potential job losses at Heathrow, which have already been mentioned. But actually, other sectors of the economy have been hit really hard as well, across manufacturing, wholesale, retail, and hospitality. And Oxford Economics research suggests that the West London GVA could fall by around about 9% this year. So, faced with these additional challenges that COVID-19 has presented, the West London boroughs have mobilised very quickly. And last week we launched our Build and Recover plan. And I'm going to hand over to Paul Nazarak, Chief Executive of London Borough of Ealing.
I just wanted to cover our Build and Recover plan, which David mentioned in West London we published last week. And really it's an urgent call for action to avoid the long-term scarring impacts that we all worry COVID and the economic impacts of COVID could have on our communities. As David said, we know we've got loads of strengths in West London traditionally, and we're sure those strengths will still be relevant for us in the long term. But we've got to make sure we respond to the issues we're confronting, and especially those issues about persistent deprivation and economic exclusion that existed before COVID but have been exacerbated and amplified by COVID. So we've got an ambitious plan as West London authorities. As Chief Executive Ealing, alongside all the other Chief Execs, all the leaders, we're fully committed to it. And all the Chief Execs and leaders playing a role in leading that plan. I play a role around regeneration, especially around employment support in West London. And the focus of the Build and Recover plan is protecting and creating tens of thousands of jobs, providing timely and good quality employment support and skills provision, driving innovation and embedding a green recovery, and helping to regenerate the national economy. We don't believe the UK can be a success without a successful West London. We're also working with all partners across sectors, many of whom are at the conference today, public sector, the government, the private sector, and really crucially our communities. We need to work with our communities, not do to our communities. We've established a West London Economic Recovery Task Force with senior representation from across public and private sector, and that reports to our West London Leaders Board. And you've heard from Councillor Cowan already this morning, who chairs that Recovery Task Force. Really now, colleagues, it's about separating the hype from the reality of what has changed, what will change, but it's also about recognising that we've got some agency. We're powerful actors in the West London economy across the private and public sector, and we can do things that are going to make a difference together. And we're all very committed to doing that across our partnership. I think Councillor Cowan's focused on the areas of focus: growth sectors, aviation communities, employment and skills, entrepreneurialism, microbusiness, green recovery, our town centres, and our housing and our infrastructure. So crucially, we want to sustain and improve our economy and learn the lessons from pre-COVID and address the issues of COVID. But we want to make sure that our economy addresses social challenges and economic challenges in West London.